Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the Grand Campaign. This is episode 2. I'm here with Richard and Josh. Good morning, gentlemen.
Guten Morgen.
So, before we get into this, we actually had a bunch of questions from last time, but I also wanted to say you guys are both DMs. I know you were both running games, and yes, I use the term DMs. What are you guys running? How have your games been this month? What's been going on in the world of role playing for you?
Josh, you want to start?
Now you're well. I mean, like I know that your game right now is you're doing something almost Arthurian with your uh, oh, can't hear Josh. Josh, you're gonna have to restart that whole thing. Hold on one second. Apologies for the technical issues. Audio output, add source. All right, Josh, try saying something.
Something.
There you go. All right, Josh, what's going on in your game? I need more coffee.
So
All right.
original.
It is the game is going well. I was just saying we had our first player death in episode 13 last week, when all of the creatures in the region suddenly became wreathed in shadow and started rampaging about, and the players are in this caravan that's trying to establish a new resource base in an otherwise unexplored part of the mountains. And in the battle, the caravan was completely overrun. There's a lot of just really good rolls on my side of the screen. And one of the players died, and he was just he was the sweet kid. He's a noble, and it's a fairly brutal feudal society, and he's the one trying to like figure out how to make this genuine, this relationship between the lower classes and the nobility, where we're actually filling a need and whatnot. So he died, and the whole party is reeling from it. Last night, everybody was rolling horribly, and everybody was role playing it as grief, and it was really good. So
Solid.
the campaign's going really well.
And this is your Arthurian era of your
Yes.
region of your world, where you have
Yeah.
he's got like you can stay on the path, but if you go off the path between cities, then quests start and very hero questy as well.
Yeah, I'm reading a lot of Greg Stafford. I forget what the actual work is called, but just like a ton of notes that he has on hero quests and what that actually is,
Yeah.
as inspiration. But yeah, they haven't quite moved into the Arthurian parts of it quite yet. But yeah, questing with a capital Q
Yeah.
is going to become a pretty major element of the campaign pretty soon.
Now you got back to Emporia this week, right?
Yeah, so the two games that I'm really running, three games right now, two of which I would characterize under our grand campaign definition we talked about last time. I also picked up this week, and then this last week I picked up a campaign called the Book of it's called Thunder in the North.
Mm-hmm.
So technically this is sort of part two or season two or like the second half. It's called The Well of Silence.
Nice.
And this is all set in a setting called The World Under Starlight, which is, I don't even really know that we want to get into that too much, but basically the way
It'll be a bonus episode where we just
Yeah,
talk about
yeah. The World Under Starlight is it's kind of a project that I've been working on for the last 20 years now. and it's got anthropological and linguistic and literary and poetic
Mm-hmm.
historiographical sort of angles to it. So there's very large body of texts, and it was not something that was created to be a tabletop
Mm-hmm.
setting. But then at some point you just sort of have all the things you need for that.
Yeah.
So I've been running for the last 3 or 4 years. Been running a campaign setting that for my wife and a couple of my siblings and a couple of friends.
Yeah.
And that's been great. The This is one of the the dangers of letting people play in your pet sandbox. Because where we left off when we took a break in the fall because we were doing some house remodeling and we had a baby and stuff, so we're just now picking up after about 4 months. But where we last left off, the players had done something that uh, uh, they had this artifact that they had, oh gosh. Quick summary.
That's too much. Let me sum up.
Yeah. Let me explain. It's too much. Let me sum up. So they essentially they went back in time as and became reincarnated as earlier selves. They rang a bell, or no, they rang the bell, which was sent them back in time, and then they found themselves in a loop, fighting this hopeless battle over and over again, and dying every time. And they finally managed to break out of the loop by using something called the Anvil of Leninomen, which is this ancient artifact that was brought to that part of the world many aeons previously. And the Anvil of Leninomen is it's a cube, not unlike a 6-sided die.
Mm-hmm.
And each side of the anvil shows a starscape. So astronomy, astrology are very important to the setting, as the name, the world under starlight sort of implies.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
tie there.
Yeah. And so basically, for the players to like decipher what this thing does, they have to have been paying attention to all of the detailed astronomical lore, which is mostly communicated in poetry, that I've been quite feeding them
For the last 4 years.
Yeah. And of course, because they're players, they weren't paying attention. So it took them a couple of tries to get this right. But basically, each of those 6 starscapes shows, let's say, a different possible history, a different path the world could have taken. And so by ringing the anvil on the specific side, it forces a localized, it forces that version of reality on the proximity, like not on the entire world, just on that immediate proximity. And so they use it to turn the invading army into a haunted forest of stone trees, like you do, which then they find out like they've been like perpetually getting lost and dealing with crap in that forest for the entire campaign, and then they realize they're actually the ones that created it, which is pretty fun.
It's always a great moment.
Which was pretty fun. And there's a bunch of other really, really cool stuff that is too difficult to get into. Like one of the players, his first character in this campaign previously went back in time because he fell in love with a swan maiden and then swam out to her forbidden island, broke the 3 taboos of the island, and then had his soul consumed by the Great King. At which point, the swan maiden in question put his soul into a beech nut, and then took it back, sort of in time. It's a little
iffy on how.
Yeah. And planted the beech nut back in the original. Planted the beech nut in the courtyard of this tower that the others were defending over and over again, stuff like this. And so when it was kind of all over, his character emerges from the tree and takes the anvil and hides it. And so then in the main timeline, back in sort of the present day, they're trying to find the anvil before the bad guys do. So they find the anvil, and they need to ring it again. And theoretically, they should know how things work now, right? And but because they're players, they don't. And so, so they take the anvil and they ring it, and it turns. They're on this floating city, and it turns everything on the floating city into stone, and the whole city starts sinking. And they were like, "Well, crap! This is bad." And so, um, and so Arthur, my brother, who's playing the campaign, he says, "Well, can I re-roll this?" I said, "No, it's a crit. You can't normally re-roll crits." He said, "Well, but I have a dark fate point."
Because you're using the clash system.
Yeah. And I said, "Tell me more. Talk to me about this. Like, what do you want to suggest?" And he's like, "I want to use my dark fate point to like switch it over, bring this other side instead." And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll allow it." So he uses the dark fate point, rolls a critical fail.
A second time.
Second time. And I said, "Okay, here's what happens." He said, "You call out to the dark powers lurking at the depths of the sea beneath you."
Mm-hmm.
And at the bottom of the sea, there are monsters.
Yeah. Where else would you put?
They're sort of collectively known as the many-eyed things, but it's not a species; it's just a descriptor. And so the and so he calls upon these dark powers. He rings the anvil, and the anvil shatters. And I said, "Well, we're stuck there for 3 or 4 months. I have to go and write a bunch of new history.
Figure out what this means."
Because the timeline has now been changed." And it actually worked out really nicely because I had a big, about a 400 or 500 year gap that I had broad sketches, but I hadn't really filled in some of the details, like how did certain things get where they are. So this actually just kind of gave me all of that. So I went and wrote a bunch of mystical poetry, like you do.
Yeah.
And and then nested that mystical poetry within let's say um, a larger textual tradition, kind of like the Book of Enoch sort of thing. And then wrote several hymns based off of that, and then put those hymns in the Emborian liturgy. So that all took me about 3 or 4 months. So now that everything is like set, we picked up again. So when the players woke up, they woke up floating on driftwood out in the middle of the sea, the wreckage of some kind of a merchant ship. They're immediately attacked by a harkle, which are kind of like sharks, and the fights dragging on and getting worse and worse, and then this some guys show up and rescue them, and the people that show up and rescue them are people that they know, but they don't recognize the players
because they've changed so much.
And the players, so when they start to interrogate things, they find out, okay, it's been about a year, maybe a year and a half since we went missing. Nobody recognizes us. In fact, nobody even has memory of ever meeting us. And every single one of the players has a large obsidian shard from the anvil embedded in a painful place in their body. I should say not that painful place. It's just like a random painful place. And so that was kind of what we did, and it was really good to get back into it. Yeah, I'm super excited about it. We have a lot of, and of course, Fading Suns is going great.
Yeah,
just continuing our kind of grand campaign there. So yeah.
Well, and if you guys tuned in on Behind the Screen on Thursday, I talked about my Jackals game, so I'm not going to recap that necessarily here, but I am glad to be back in.
I will say, and this is a grand campaign exclusive.
Yeah.
Because I haven't made any announcements about this anywhere yet. If you're interested in World Under Starlight, I did send off a manuscript to a publisher on Tuesday.
Yeah. And
so sometime this year there will be a slim volume of some text, some translation notes, and a map. And if that goes well, then there will be a lot more of that sort of thing.
Very cool. Well, I know I'm going to buy a copy, but maybe we'll also buy a copy and give it away on the
campaign. Oh, so that'd be cool. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure I can convince the powers that be.
Is that you?
That's me.
Yeah.
to do that. Well, before we get into our topic for today, we actually have several questions. And first of all, let me say hi to everyone in chat. Rook, always good to see you. Thank you for your generosity as always. Evan and Becca, good to see you as well. So we had a question on the iconic Discord, and
We have there's a Discord.
yeah, I'll invite you to it.
I might be on it.
You're casting.
I'm on like a million Discords.
I will get you invited to that. And they asked the question, well, how do you incorporate modules into a grand campaign? I thought it was a good question because one of the advantages of the grand campaign that we talked about last week is because they're going so long, you don't need to be on every week.
Right.
And there are times where you're going to be like, well, what do I do? Well, I've got, I mean, as Josh was saying in our when we were pre-gaming, that's the beauty of the term module. They're designed to be just
literally what it means.
Dropped in, and that's actually how the old modules were done. I mean, all the way through first and second edition D&D. I think RuneQuest is still doing it this way. Call of Cthulhu is a weird one because it's not so much that the scenarios are modular, but the player characters are modular. Oh, this one died again. Better find a new one. So then the neat thing about this is that it actually now, and I get in some ways it may be more difficult to do with, say, a game like 5e where their modules are really more campaigns now at this point. But still, there's nothing that says one of your B tracks or one generation could be dealing with the Princes of the Apocalypse that you're foreshadowing years before and then dealing with the fallout years after. So what do you guys think about incorporating published material into a grand campaign?
First of all, at some point we are going to talk. It's not this episode, so don't at me. Or do. I don't care. Some systems are better than others for the grand campaign.
Actually, we are going to talk about that.
Is that this episode?
Yeah, that's
are you sure?
Yeah,
I think that's
next episode.
3.
That is next episode.
Yeah,
okay.
Episode.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just
tease
this and like maybe enrage some people so come watch the next episode. D&D 5e, not the best system for a grand campaign. Not saying you can't do it, but it's just not mechanically. That's not the game. You could say that every game in its mechanics has a set of implicit assumptions, and mechanically, those are not the implicit assumptions of 5e, right? So,
having started in 5e and building my world as I learned 5e and everything, 100% agree.
Yeah, Josh is running 5e in the same way that guy who's been running 1e for 40 years is still running 1e. Like Josh has
that has been
composited on it.
Yeah, well, that has been the story of my investigation into RPGs and trying to change 5th edition. Is every time I go to JM and say, all right, this part of 5th edition it just doesn't work. It does not work with the lore. It's really throwing me off. So I was going to change it this way, and you go, oh yeah, cool. Like here's a couple PDFs of the way it used to be done, and it was just like that. Cool. There's a whole bunch of my work done for me.
Yeah, I mean, what is it that we say? Like any game that you're still playing by the book, you just haven't played long enough. Like if you don't have house rules, it's just because you haven't been playing long enough.
Oh, I have a 123-page player's guide that basically says, great, so you know 5th edition, now you need to understand what we're doing here. And at the moment, character creation takes about 2 hours, so I need to figure out how to streamline that.
New systems are born.
Yeah. And Becca and Evan can attest. In the Jackals game, suddenly they were like, "Well, what kind of herbs can I buy?" And I was like, "I will tell you next week." And I spent the week writing up a bunch of herbalism rules and plants that exist in the northern end of the Zaharets because I didn't have them.
I have all of my herb lore for the world under Starlight in a series of like old midwife poems, and it's like the oral poems that people would memorize to help them remember what each herb does. And the in-game effect of this is super cool, and the actual practical, oh, you need an herb for that, let me I'll have to read through all these poems again. So like it's a little indexing wise is a little slow. So
Well, and you said we had some questions on Facebook as well.
Yeah, so somebody reached out to me over Facebook, and this is a fun conversation, and hopefully he's listening to this. Uh, uh, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, so have you ever heard of something called Critical Role?" And I said, "Yes,
That's right.
yes, I have heard of Critical Role."
I've not been living under a rock in
Yes.
role-playing space for
Right.
the last 5 years.
Right. And he said, so so by your definition, is Critical Role a grand campaign?
Oh, that's interesting
And I
because each
said,
successive
right.
game.
Well, and I said, no, it's not. And so we kind of went back and forth over this a little bit. And, he kind of had maybe two things that he was concerned about. Like, one is, by saying Critical Role is not a grand campaign, am I saying it's a bad campaign? And the answer to that is no.
Mhm.
And then the other question is like, well, if Critical Role is not a grand campaign, then how is the grand campaign that we're talking about? How is that different from something like Critical Role? So I'll preface this by I'll try to answer this, and then you guys can take a stab at it.
Okay.
I'll preface this by saying I've only watched I watched the entirety of season 1 of Critical Role. I think from the day that they dropped it. I think.
Yeah.
Just it was one of those things the algorithm brought across my way. And I was
Right,
like,
and the zeitgeist was sort of perfect for it.
yeah, and it was like, this is cool. These are fun people having a fun game, things like this. So I got all the way to the end of season 1. I got maybe a handful of episodes or sessions into season 2, and then I stopped watching it. And the main reason that I stopped watching it is that for me it became less enjoyable. There was let's say just a higher proportion of the kind of drama that I don't enjoy to the kind of drama that I do enjoy. And the story started to it felt more like a show in starting season 2. It felt more like a show than just like I'm watching somebody's cool game. So I'm not taking anything away from Mercer or anybody else by saying that. It's just saying season 2 had less of the things that I enjoy and more of the things I don't enjoy. So I stopped watching it. But Mercer's been incredible for the hobby. And I wish him all the best. Certainly he doesn't care what I say because he's never heard of me before.
That's right.
So
that's a good mental humility.
Yes. It's like he's but I've certainly learned a lot about GMing by watching him. And I'm really grateful for that. So I would not characterize Critical Role as a grand campaign. Critical Role is a series of campaigns that have occasionally tie-ins to each other, and that's not what we're talking about on this show. So the way it is, it's different. The thing that we're talking about, Critical Role, and I would say this is the kind of campaign that the mechanics of 5th edition are designed to encourage this kind of play. Critical Role is a campaign where you have a single long campaign, going more than 100 sessions, let's say, where you're mainly just focused on one group of players. Now, this does not mean somebody couldn't die or somebody couldn't retire a character and bring in a new one. But the intent is that some of the people who started that campaign will be playing the same character at level 20 that they were playing at level 1. Right? Then you finish that campaign, you start the next campaign. You start back at level 1, level 5, or whatever. And you do that same thing. Like the same characters you're playing at the beginning, you're going to be playing at level 20.
And it's iterative, and it's building on the previous campaign. It is not a direct...
Right. So that is multiple campaigns set up the same campaign world, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Please do not get me wrong.
No, it's
that
basically
awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Keloth is now the Wild Hunter.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And Ghost is just one of those threads that just keeps popping up through the whole oeuvre.
So that's different from what we were talking about. In that, I would say one of the things that defines a grand campaign, right, is the fact that one of the implicit assumptions is that you will never be playing the same character at the end that you were playing at the beginning. That at the very least, multiple generations are going to pass, and so those characters would have aged out or retired from just overwhelming, crushing PTSD.
Yeah.
Which is what all adventurers probably have.
Oh yeah. Or
in my games, anyway.
Yeah, in Jackals, it's also loss of limbs.
Right. Yeah.
Right, Becca? Those characters just go off into the hills to tend horses, and everything is fine.
Oh, did she go to the farm?
She retired her character to the farm, and all the other players were like, "Well, that was happy." And I was like, I'm sitting there going, she's still up there, guys. For the people of that campaign, don't worry, she's still up there tending horses.
So, Richard, where would you put? Right. So the more I think about this, and the better I understand kind of our definition here of grand campaign, the less I think I'm running one.
Fair.
But
it's my definition and the definition.
Oh, sure.
That I kind of, like, I'm not trying to, like, get into anybody else's business or anything like that.
No, it's useful terminology.
Yeah.
Like I always appreciate the introduction of new and useful terminology that means specific things that we don't have terms for yet.
So the classic kind of like the granddaddy of this play style is the Great Pendragon campaign.
Yes.
Right. So the Great Pendragon campaign is we're going to get into this when we talk about systems next week, and that's actually where I'm going to start talking.
Yeah.
Because basically the Great Pendragon campaign is the origin of this play style, as far as I can tell.
I would agree with that, and I think what's interesting is when you look at what brought the Great Campaign into existence, you had house games at Chaosium where one Call of Cthulhu character, like you're playing through Mass of Nyarlathotep, no one's surviving from session 1 to the end, but you also had his grand. And they're actually, Chaosium will be releasing this here soon, which if you're interested to hear about, jump into the Exploring Glorantha show with me and Evan. But the Grand Sartor campaign, that's what they were doing.
Right.
It ran 30 or 40 in-game years.
That's cool.
And they're going to actually publish that later this year. Yeah, right? But yeah, all of these things were coming together. And then Stafford is an old school Arthurian guy.
Yeah.
And so he put together this campaign where he's like, no, the knights that are alive in Uther's time aren't the knights that die when Mordred and
Camelot.
Yeah, Camelot. Yeah. And it's
Camelot.
Camelot
is the guy. Yeah. Yeah. Camelot is the
it's the the cast.
So
So get you in my game of Jackals here soon.
Yeah, so the Great Pendragon campaign, actually my original term for this sort of thing when JM and I first started talking about it was the Great Campaign. But then we realized if we called it that for a podcast, people were like, are you saying my campaign's not great? And that's not what we're trying to say at all. But the Great Pendragon campaign takes place over a course of 60 years. Right now, you got to think about like how many years of adventuring do you actually have in you if you are going to do what most adventurers do, which or like theoretically would do, right? Which is like settle down, get married, make babies, like
continue the knightly
lineage, all these different things. Especially in these sort of like medieval or quasi-medieval or ancient or quasi-ancient societies where the values are much more oriented towards, let's say stability is not something you can take for granted. Right nowadays, I can, we live in such an ultra-stable society. Like, I know sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but actually our society is so incredibly stable that I could basically choose to like, I don't know, like join the circus and like be a carny and wander around. And like nothing really bad would happen as far as society goes, right? But in the ancient world, if you're living in the Bronze Age or you're living in England in kind of the Arthurian time, whatever that is, different podcast. If you choose not to, if you have power, wealth, means, etc., and you choose not to like hunker down and establish something and contribute to stability, then basically you're giving up the fight to chaos, right? So that's not great.
No, I mean, if you think about it, look back at the late Roman Empire when they started building castles and we started moving from a stable imperial society to sort of the ground roots of the feudal society. It was because everything's starting to break down. What do we do? We hunker down.
Yeah. So so if you think about like, well, okay, so if my eventual goal is to establish a family and establish a lineage and all these different things, then what's my average adventuring? You know, how many years am I really going to do this roving adventure thing, right? There's always going to be like the one guy who holds on to it for too long, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
He's Cohen
yes,
in
yes,
the Discworld series.
yeah. Cohen in the Discworld series, or you know, I'm getting too old for this crap. That guy.
Yeah. Murtaugh.
Murtaugh. Yeah, thank you. I just haven't had enough coffee yet.
That's right.
And there's always going to be one person who holds on to it for too long, but the majority of successful adventurers, or you know, majority of adventurers will either not be successful and therefore they will die or rot in a dungeon somewhere. Very under. By the way, I just want to say it's a very underused, terrible outcome for players. So if you instead of killing this player character off, you could just have them rot away in a dungeon for 20 years.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks they're dead. And then later on in, you know, the campaign, a generation later, somebody comes and finds them. And you're like, oh, who is this withered old man who's like mutilated and insane? And then you realize, oh, that used to be my character.
That's right.
That would be a great reveal.
I feel like that's the end of the Children of Fury.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, yeah. So if anyway, you guys are free to use that. So realistically, most people are going to adventure for it probably 10 years maximum, and that's honestly sort of pushing.
Yeah, like 3 to 5 is usually the lifespan of a jackal.
Yeah. But let's say it's 10 years maximum. Well, if you have a 60-year campaign, if nothing bad happens to my character, then I'm going to be playing 6 characters. Now, a grand campaign on that scale might play out over the same number of sessions as a single campaign of something like Critical Role, right? What that means is you're going to be doing less per character, like you'll have less density per character, like, you know, of sessions. And something that this guy that I was talking to on Facebook, something he brought up is, well, it's like, I think that you'd get a more satisfying character arc if you do it the Critical Role way. And I said, quite possibly. You know, satisfying character arcs, I mean, there are a lot of different things that go into a satisfying character arc. Link may or may not be one of those. I mean, in the grand campaign set in Middle Earth that I ran for 7.5 years, actually some of the most memorable characters only really had 6 or 7 sessions as a player character, but they burn so brightly in those
like
6.
Moonin. I'm looking right at you, Ben. I know you'll watch this later.
They burned so brightly. Actually, Ben's a good example because he had this one character and she was an elf and she was like a kind of a troublesome NPC for a while before that. So everyone had a history with her. And when something happened to one of his characters, his name was Duvania. He said, "Can I play Duvania doll?" And I said, yes, you can, because I knew that he would do an amazing job with it, and he did an amazing job with it. And he only played it for like 8 sessions before she died horribly. But it was so memorable, and she went out. Can I say badass on this show?
Yeah, totally.
She went out like such a badass, and it was glorious. So I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. So let me just kind of wrap all this up to say, in a grand campaign, the focus is not on a particular group of player characters. In fact, you could say the story arc or the narrative arc is more about places than it is about characters. In that the places, right, the communities that the players invest in, one character after character after character, those actually become the story arcs that you become invested in an ideal grand campaign. Now, obviously, there's going to be a spectrum to these things. And if somebody wants to come at me and argue, like, 10 Critical Role seasons from now, when like Mercer is like DMing from the nursing home, and I don't, just like however many seasons from now, and like, why are you saying, and all the campaigns are tied together, and you're saying, so you're saying that's not a grand campaign, Richard? Like, okay, whatever. Like, sure.
The evidence that we have today.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is Mercer is running a very good campaign. The kind of campaign that he's running is the kind of campaign that the mechanics of D&D 5th edition suggests. If you're playing something else, we're going to talk more about what mechanics support a grand campaign next time. If you're playing something else that supports a grand campaign, your story pacing will go differently, right? In a single Critical Role campaign, I think in season 1, the whole amount of, I mean, you think about like all of the existential threats that they face, but actually it took place over like a year and a half of a real of in world time.
Yeah, and in a grand campaign,
Right.
the idea would be that each one of those existential threats would be pulled out and
Yeah.
teased out and drawn out for a group to deal with.
Yes.
And then your next.
Yeah.
Now, Rook brought up in the chat that he still uses Pathfinder 1E. And when we talk next week about, or next session,
And just a giant. So Pathfinder 1E was my first D&D.
Oh yeah.
And so
It's got the mechanics to support something like this, like with like in a certain way.
Thing about Pathfinder, it's got mechanics to support anything,
except if you were to like place all of the, it cannot support its own weight. You would need reinforced bookshelves.
I actually built my house out of Pathfinder 1E books.
That's fair. I plan to do it out of my next house will be out of Dwarven Forge. That's my goal. Yeah. So then it's modular.
Love it.
Take the part, put it back together. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. So I watched all Critical Role 1 or most of Critical Role 1 just to kind of tie it back in here. And this is again, I love Critical Role and I love what they've done for the hobby. And as Rook said, Mercer would agree with kind of our points on this game. But I run a lot of sequential games in Tanar, and while they continue to build on the ones that came before, they are not a grand campaign in the fact that they are not in the same way that we're talking about it. I think we have a really solid definition. We should probably put that on the website when we get the page going. But even we had a gentleman, we had a commenter. I won't make an assumption. Indigo Dragon. They loved the first episode of the Grand Campaign, and they were commenting on my behind the screen thing. They said, "Hey, I love Jackals. I don't like the way you run Torg," which is fine because I run it like a show. So like the chat does things, and I give them the meta currency, and then they get to spend. They can be like, "Oh, Richard's out of possibility. Here's my possibility I'm giving to you," or "Ooh, that bad guy's way too cool for him to die. Here's a possibility to soak." And I think that's sort of the difference as you were talking about between season 1 and season 2.
Yeah.
It felt more like a show. And that's fine. I get that the show style is not as engaging for some people. Some people really love it. And that's the beauty of role-playing games on the internet right now. You can find either the niche that you love or the niche that you don't. And
just as a blanket statement, folks, it's okay for people to do things and it not be your favorite thing.
Yeah.
I don't understand that, Richard. I
I
can't wrap my mind around that.
I just broke the internet.
A disagreement in opinions does not constitute fighting words.
You're not automatically a bad person if you disagree with me.
Oz says that he's just here for my meta currency.
Is that like a crypto thing? Are you starting a crypto?
Yeah,
you should start a crypto for your Torg. I could help you set that up.
Yeah,
it would be just as worthless as
every other.
Yeah,
as most others, I guess. I either they're worth a lot or they're not worth anything. I just don't understand.
Did you know somebody made a what's it called? An NFT trading card of me?
Did they really?
Yeah. Somebody reached out to me and said, "Can I?" Because I do like other podcasts and things. And somebody reached out to me and said, "I'm doing like NFT trading cards of podcasters. I'm selling them. Can I make one of you?" And I was like, knock yourself out, man.
But now you don't own your own image.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all right.
That is not a joke that I can tell on the podcast, but I will share it after. All right, so we're going to kind of get into the topic for today, and I don't know how long this is going to go because we enjoy
real quick, just like I've been talking a lot, and you said as you're listening to me talk about what I think a grand campaign is, you're like, I'm not sure if I'm right. So, do you want to say anything about that, or?
Sure. Yeah, I was just curious because I'm running multiple. I have run multiple campaigns. Some core players, some switching out, all within the same 2-year time span of the world. And for the most part, that's because in the first campaign they accidentally, they didn't create. They failed to stop an attempted ascension ritual to become basically the god of sadism and blood in the absence of all other gods, which means there's
Why
no
is
check
that
on
a
the
thing?
power,
This is
anything like
They
that.
failed.
This is the thing I always wonder. It's like, why is there a god of murder?
Feels
like it's just a bad decision.
It had to do with necessity, essentially, right? It was the only. So I have a. We're not going to get into it, but I have a whole write up of the possible ways in which to become a god.
Oh, sure.
And it has a lot of requirements, and what's a lot easier than all of the others is ritually murder an entire city.
Sure.
So,
Like
and the way that you ascend
There's
dictates
a
in a lot of ways the domain, I guess, that you end up with. Anyway, right, and so if I were to like move ahead in time, even just like 5 years, cool. The world, it ended without the intervention of player groups. Right, the world ends before 5 years is over. So I mean, that's partially just necessity because I can't fit my mind around advancing time. But it is multiple groups of players, and some the previous two campaigns have ended or been put on hold, but those characters are still alive. And like at some point, all of those characters that are still alive will very likely end up, yeah, we're gonna come back to them, and they may very well, like there is a potential future where, great, over the course of 4 or 5 campaigns, the players have managed to create various groups and communities that are prepared to fight against this god. And when all of that comes together, players will be playing multiple of their old characters and their current characters. Other people will bring in to play other player characters where the players aren't playing in the group anymore, and things like that. So I don't know. I was just having trouble wrapping my mind around it, and I have no idea what I'm running, which fits. Like I started running D&D because I was just like, cool, I've seen 300 hours of Critical Role. I think I can do this. I've got a troll. Now I'm building a dungeon around it, and I just like the whole world has more or less just been built that way. So like it fits. I didn't set out to write a grand campaign, and I've been wrestling with 5th edition the whole time.
That's like we were originally talking about putting this together. Richard and I have been talking about doing this for probably years, and I was like, well, I've got this buddy Josh, and when you were like, well, I don't know that I'm running a grand campaign, and here's why I feel like you are a great voice to have on the show, because you are moving toward it.
Yeah.
Like you have started this thing, and you are seeing the potential of having a grand campaign style game. And yes, I've seen your players document, and you are creating and stealing and like Frankensteining this game system together with the body of 5e, but you are moving toward what we're talking about. And so I thought it would be a great voice to have on the show.
Well, that's the thing. Like a lot of times we end up in our own gaming experiences recapitulating like the kind of the larger meta history of the hobby. And so
fractals all the way down.
Right. You can think about something like the Great Pendragon campaign. Well, the Great Pendragon campaign existed, and I can guarantee you this is what happened without actually like having gone and researched the history of why did Greg Saffron write the Great Pendragon campaign. But existed because at some point he played some other game, and there was this multi-generational thing which probably wasn't in the original mechanics, right? Because back in those days, the original mechanics of RPGs were
3 little tiny books.
It was like so you start at the door of the dungeon, you know, and you're going to clear levels, and each level is a level on your character sheet, right? You know, that kind of a thing.
That's why we overuse the word level at 28.
A little bit.
Spell level?
Yes.
Level of dungeon?
Yes.
Level of my character?
Yes. Yeah. And why you know, yeah. So And so at some point, like he had that experience that emerged, and then he was like, "Oh, this is cool. I should write this."
Mhm.
And so that's this, Josh. I think that's kind of what you're going through right
Mhm.
now. Is you're having this experience that's emerging, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
I can't. I will probably when we cover Against the Dark Master, I'll share this story again. But I got the chance to talk with the guys from Iron Crown Enterprises at Gen Con, and essentially the reason Rollmaster, which is why we got Middle Earth role playing game, existed, is because some guy at a D&D game saw his buddy. They were on a cliff face. They were being swarmed by creatures, and the barbarian went, "How far down is the cliff?" And GM was like, "Oh, it's like 200 feet." And he's like, "See you guys, I can take the fall damage," and jumped off a 200-foot cliff because the mechanics would support it. And the other player was like, "Nope, I'm gonna write my own role-playing game with more tables and falling damage that makes sense." And that's basically how that's how Jackals was born.
Yeah.
Well, D&D.
That's been my whole lament of 5th edition is I need more tables. Please, give me more tables.
Yeah, I mean, the real solution is to start your own tables with blackjack.
Yeah.
And women of the night. The Bender method. So again, we're not. Please don't hear we're not dogging on 5th edition because it does the heroic fantasy arc possibly better than any other game on the market. Like you're gonna get from Brooke says what he's hearing us say is that Josh needs to be running 1E Pathfinder. Yeah, like 100%.
If you want tables, Josh,
that's right. They have tables to find the tables.
I keep meaning to, sorry, I keep forgetting to say, it sounded like you just tapped something. I can't actually see you guys. I can see JM's desktop.
I sometimes don't know what happened.
Let me fix that.
I did accidentally tap the table, but I mean, we can see us.
We can see us. I will get that. Here, you keep talking. I'll go fix that.
Is it?
No, Jim, it's fine. It's been the whole time.
Monitor for Josh.
Oh, right.
He's seeing this.
Yeah. So I'm gonna do a little song and dance number while John Matthew messes with the technical stuff. So to kind of sum all this up, what I would say, and this actually gets into the thing that we're actually supposed to talk about in the 15 minutes remaining to our showtime.
We're even longer than that, you know it.
Oh yeah, fair. But the thing that basically the way I would kind of characterize it is to say that if you play a grand campaign, your priorities as player will shift.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what I saw over the course of running a grand campaign for 7.5 years with my tour group, was that it started out, they were just in like kind of happy-go-lucky murder hobo mode, like you do. But then as they became more invested in the world, as their characters got older, and especially when they got, to the second iteration of characters, because most of the first generation of characters died about 15 sessions in. Because they took the wrong road, which in Middle Earth is enough to just get you killed. The priorities began to shift from saying, okay, I'm just gonna have a fun, happy-go-lucky time and do all these cool things and make my character as cool as I can, to two things. One is I'm invested in this community, and I want to make sure that the outcomes and the futures of this community that I've spent a lot of time, investing in, I want to make sure that this community is going to be stable in the next generation. And then the other thing is people became, especially my wife, Sophie, she became very concerned that when her characters were done adventuring, that they would have a proper so just like a proper peaceful retirement. She loved her characters enough that after they had adventured for 5 or 6 years or something like this, she wanted to make sure that she didn't try to hold on to them too long. And she wanted to make sure that they would retire far enough away from all the enemies that they had made that nothing bad would happen to them, which didn't always work out.
No. That's actually why. So there's 2 rules in Jackals that are directly based off my friendship with you.
Oh.
The retirement rule
Yes.
is because what we were talking about with Sophie's characters in the tour game. But then if you guys look at the death rules, there's actually, I think I actually call it the Rohlin rule.
Yes.
If you write the poem to
Yes.
celebrate the death
Yeah.
of your character, you get extra advancements on your next character.
Yeah, so this is something that we did in the tour game was if a character died, whenever a character died, I would say, we would finish wrapping up the session. I'd say, okay, next session, we're going to start with the funeral.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they were somewhere they could actually, sometimes they'd just be on the run or something like that. And you had two options. One is you could compose a death dirge for your fallen companions yourself. And if you did that, then you would get a certain number of advancements. The other thing you could do is if you did not feel up to the job of composing poetry. And I just say, most of the people in my group were not the sort of people who would just write poetry for fun. But by the end of the campaign, everybody was doing it, because it was just because there are things like, there are song rules in Tor. And so my house song rules were if you compose an original thematically appropriate poem, then you'll get an extra die to roll and these different things. And we actually kept a book of all the poetry for the campaigns, just kind of a fun artifact. But
I feel like you should publish it on Lulu, not available for anyone else, and hand out the book of poems at the end of the campaign.
Should be awesome. But one of the other rules we had though is if you wanted to, you could commission a bard to, i.e. me, to compose a funerary poem that would be performed at the funeral. And if you did this, then whatever gold you put into commissioning the bard, you would basically get back as XP, shared among the group.
Yeah.
So it was this way to, mechanically support the idea that you should make sure that the names of your fallen companions are not forgotten.
Sorry, somebody in the chat pointed out that Josh knows all about commissioning bards.
Thank you, Becca. I see that.
Josh commissioned a bard in our RuneQuest game because he could not woo, or he was traveling around and wanted to woo this Humati.
I was a fertility priest. I was capable of doing it. I was just very busy and wanted to make sure she didn't forget about me.
So he hires a bard and it's this is how beautiful she is, and this is all of her great things. She's ready to marry me, but I have to do this quest, And the bard was like, man, she sounds really great. So he took the money and then went to woo.
Oh no!
So Josh comes back and finds out that this guy has done the same hero quest and also brought back a star ram, but's been there making the poetry.
I know he ended the campaign as a mindless lunar thrall, and I appreciate that, but also I still don't forgive him.
All right, so we've talked a lot about kind of around our topic for today. So our topic for today is, why would anyone do this? And we did get one comment. I'm like, no. The goal of Grant campaign is not just so that DMs can kill more player characters. That is
so players can kill more player characters.
It's so players can kill more player characters, right? It's not about the body count,
right? It
is about the long-term sustainability of the game. It's the fact that you don't have to. There is an assumption in D20 fantasy, and this goes for any game that basically uses a D20 and species and class kind of merged together. So Pathfinder 1, 2, 13th Age, all of these things, that the character you're going to start with is most likely the one you're going to end, and you're going to start as 0, and you're going to end as a hero, and you're going to save the world. That is the general arc of heroic fantasy, and that's great. I love that game. I played that game basically since day one of role playing. Well, maybe not day one. Day one was GURPS. It's a superhero game. It's not my best game. But the idea of the Grand Campaign is the game can outlast any single story or any single player, or honestly, any single DM. Right? It is a sustainable model for making sure that this group, through all of the changes that life brings up, we talked about that last session, will continue to move forward. So I'm going to review our core concepts from last session, right? The idea is that you're going to be playing on a regular schedule, right? We have a lot of games that are coming out now that's like, hey, 10 sessions and you're done. You can play whenever you want, because every level kind of resets the player's expectation of what's going on. You're like in this, you're actually committing to play together and to play together at a long, for a long time. We're arguing maybe 3 years is the initial investment, and it can be scary. Like there's so many things that you can be like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. That's fine. But the goal is in your session 0, if you will, to establish this so that your players know that 1, you're asking a commitment of them, but 2, you as the DM are also committing to them and saying, I'm not going to let this campaign fall away. I'm not going to let this campaign fall apart. This means enough to me that I'm willing to make time for it. I would like you to make time for it. One of the other great things about the Grand Campaign, we've seen it in the Tor game, we saw it in our RuneQuest game, players will walk away because something comes up in life, but they know the game's going on in the back of their head. And when things change again, they'll come back and be like, can I come back and take this back?
Yeah, I've had players move in and out.
Yeah. And it also,
as long as they do it in a respectful way,
yes,
it's not a problem.
No. There are, as many things in life, there are good ways to do it.
Yes.
And then there are...
If somebody comes to me and says, I've got some life things going on right now, I need to step away for a little bit, but I would love to come back again someday. So no problem, we'll probably still be playing.
Yeah. Much like a Celine Dion song, the Grand Campaign will go on.
Oh,
yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's full circle. But the other thing is, like, so there's been this discussion. Let's talk about this a little bit, because there's been this discussion about the West Marches campaign, which I think we all love the idea.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that, hey, players can be proactive. They can sit down. They can just say, hey, here's the thing we want to go do in your world.
But they weren't.
But they weren't, and they didn't. This incorporates some of this idea that, hey, players need to be proactive in the Grand Campaign. Right. They need to figure out what it is in the world they want to do.
Right.
Yeah. And so part of the thing we're pushing back with the show is the idea that it seems, and again, I'm going only based off commentaries and DMing advice channels and the surveys that game companies are putting out. But somewhere along the way, it feels as if role-playing games have gone from a cooperative creative, and this may not be for people who are watching this show. If you're watching this show, you're playing you're interested in a specific style of game, you may not be like, well, I've never had that. But that it's become consumptive in the way that most of our entertainment is consumptive. Players show up, they expect to sit down to be entertained. Are you not entertained? Maybe, maybe not. And then they come down, they consume the story, they move on, they come back, kind of in a circuit. And the Grand Campaign requires both GMs and players to be proactive, but in a way they have the freedom to do that because we're all agreeing in session 0. This is something that could be worth, like, we're all committing to this.
Yeah.
So let's start there. Josh, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, agreed. I think the investment in whether it's the character or the campaign, or the community, or for me, my primary investment comes from my villains. It's well, because they're me. Like, all of my villains are me. Like, you just take a part of yourself.
Which part of you is the sadistic goddess of sadism and blood? We don't want to know.
So she's not. I don't think of her as a villain.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you gotta move on, Josh.
Hold on. No. You gotta. I don't think of her as a villain as much as a cosmic force. Like, it's a villain needs more of a I don't know, more of a personality, more of a tangibility. Um, she has neither of those things at the moment, right? But yeah, you right take a solution, right? Take a solution that you have to something, strip empathy from it, and you have a villain, right? And so like I take my solutions to thing, strip empathy and right respect for human life, and then make the person smarter than I am, and then put it into the world, and then pray that your players defeat it. Because if they don't, like,
Man,
cool, I've got some thinking to do,
yeah.
and that's, I mean,
That
that's
was
a large part
that
of
was the end of
investment
the
for
last
me.
TPK game for me. Like, the death of absolute, or the restraining and the resealing off of absolute. This was a very personal win for me, even though he was trying to kill all. All right, so Richard, for you, like, what is the goal? Like, for you, how would you sum up? This is why you would want to do this.
Yeah. So last time we talked about why you would want to do this as a GM, so maybe we could talk about
Let's focus on the
do
player.
this as a player. As a GM, it's just like incredibly rewarding. If you're the kind of person who likes to just make beautiful things and spend a lot of time with them, and pour just a lot of your heart and your soul and a lot of your love into a world, this is a way to do that. I'm not saying it's the only way to do that,
Right?
That's the way to do that I enjoy the most. As a player, why would you want to do this?
Mm-hmm. And by the way, I should say that's our focus today. It's like, as a player, why would you want to sign up to for something like this?
Yeah. So our world and our experience of the world now is extremely fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
We're an extremely mobile society, and yeah, well, mobile in that way too. But I mean, so you moved across country recently.
Yeah, I moved from Colorado to Texas.
That kind of thing wasn't, like impossible or by any means like totally undoable. Like it wasn't something you couldn't do in the ancient world or in the Middle Ages or something like that. But it was definitely a lot
Even
more.
In the 1800s.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot more rare. Most people live and die in the same village, right? It's only people who are of a certain level of affluence that can actually make a move like that, right? So our society is much more mobile now, and that's got some great things about it. Don't get me wrong, but the things that it has, maybe that haven't been so great is that it's just much easier to leave a circle or to leave a group or to leave relationships, right? To leave a church, to leave a D&D group, to leave all these, like if you're somewhere and things, get tough, like one of the most one of the easiest modern solutions is simply to just kind of like pull up stakes, move along, do something else somewhere else. You can, the same sort of thing like going on, that whole great resignation thing going on right now. A lot of people who are reacting against very, unjust working conditions, right? Who are, and so what are they deciding to do? Well, they're deciding to just kind of, like just leave, just quit, right? And this is something we can do because we live in such a hyper stable society. But that hyper stability starts to allow us to be more and more fragmented in these different ways.
I think you described it once as everything is a thorn now. It all has its own individual sharp stabbing point. Focus on.
Yeah, there are too many points. Like there's too much meaning now. There's too many points to things. Right? The like hierarchy of relationships and patterns and things like that in the world, it's still there, but it's not as obvious as it used to be. So when you play a game like this, I think on a, let's say, a meta philosophical level, one of the things that it can do for you as a player is to actually, I'm not going to say heal that, because maybe that's more than the game could do, but it can definitely open your eyes a little bit to being able to think of yourself as actually being in this complex web of relationships, and within not just your nuclear family, but within your larger, family, your community, your group of friends, your parish, or your workplace. place, whatever your kind of community is. This style of gaming lends itself to helping you actually kind of see yourself in that web and in that network, and also starts you kind of thinking about, well, what about the next generation? Like, what kind of world am I leaving for the people who come after me? I mean, this is the question that's at the root of so many of our problems in society. And I'm not trying to say this in a political way at all.
No.
Because this is kind of, no matter what part of the political spectrum you're on, right?
That's the thing you're concerned with.
Right. You can look at, economic, wars. You can look at, our environmental problems, these different things, right? And most of those things stem back to a failure to kind of really be able to think about, okay, what happens when I'm gone, right? We just don't think like this. We don't like thinking like this. I've been thinking like this a lot this week, because this week I've been actually finally trying to do the adult thing and put a will together for my kids and for my wife and all this stuff. So you've gotta be able to so playing in this kind of game gets you thinking not just about, well, I want this cool moment. Like, you got to think, like, what are the motivations that players go through? Like, as players, usually your first character is like a self-insert, right? And so it's this very basic wish fulfillment, and there is nothing wrong with that as a first character, right?
Even a second, third, or fourth
Yeah.
character.
Usually, what will happen is somewhere after your first couple of characters, you'll evolve from wish fulfillment to something like trying to see the world through somebody else's eyes, right? And so you play. So usually there's one or two characters that are like pretty similar to the way that you would like to see yourself, or like an idealized version of yourself, or a version of yourself that kind of like brings in all the trauma and things like you feel like you're dealing with. Like, a lot of times, role-playing games can be like kind of like accidental self-therapy. But then eventually, usually we'll all have a character who's like somebody that's wildly different from us, right? And so we get to experience what it would be like to be a different person, to make these different choices, all these different things. And we experience those things in a way that little kids do when little kids play, right? Like when little kids play house, or when they play all the violent games that my sons play, things like this. Like, it's like, well, what if, right? But then eventually the player experience evolves from that to just, so it goes from being wish fulfillment or kind of self therapy to this kind of what if, which you could say is like at its best, that's becomes sort of like an act of empathy.
Yeah, I was going to say, it fosters empathy,
right?
Which is one of the reasons that I love
trying to see life through somebody else's perspective, which is something I do try to do as a GM. Most of my best bad guys have been, I'm not going to say good guys, or I sort of hate that, they're just misunderstood kind of a trope. But at the same time, one of my favorite villains in the Tor campaign was this guy who was, he was basically just a classic kind of Dark Ages strongman. He had, Prince Ingold now is what we call him.
I died. Prince Eagle.
He had a PR, But the thing about him is that he had a specific set of things that he wanted, and he was willing in his early days to make some deals with very bad people to get those things that he wanted. And then as he got to a position of power, then he tried to sever those ties. And but as he was a strong man, like he rose to power through very questionable means. But there was a point where the players realized, okay, we can take him down, but if we take him down, then what are we going to do to the stability of the culture that we've been trying to protect and preserve, which he's now the ruler of, right? And so it's like, we can take him down, but with everything that he's brought to the table in terms of like moral compromise, he's also brought all of this stability. So what do you do with that? And which is, that's actually a pretty good question that you have to sort of ask yourself nowadays, in a lot of different contexts. So eventually, I think the way that this can evolve, going from the self-insert to the empathy, like the what if, trying to see the world through somebody else's eyes, is to start to is to stop is to evolve beyond that and stop focusing just on one character, just on your character. What does your character want, right? It's how every campaign starts. Your first job as a GM is to give the players something to want, right? Is to put something in front of them and be like, this is worth fighting for, right? Once you have it, you can start building kind of this complex web of desires, relationships, motivations, antagonists, all these things. But you have to have that starting point of here's the one thing that you want. Maybe it's a love interest. Maybe it's you want to rescue. You make a friend, and then as soon as you make that friend, the friend is kidnapped, or something like that. Like you've got to give. There's got to be a hook, right? That will actually make you go out and risk your life for these things, and then you can build a web of relationships off of that. But the final goal for me as a player would be to have a world that feels real enough, that feels true enough, and that's beautiful enough that I could say, I don't care just about my character and what my character wants, right? I'm not to have a world that I love so much that I would be okay with not being the protagonist, right? Because not every character in every group is the protagonist. The player characters are sort of by default the protagonists, but not every character is like it's just the way that things shake out. Like you're always going to have one character who like in my games it's always we'll probably have 10 or 12 sessions where everybody's got things going on, but for those 10 and 12 sessions it's clearly about this person's story, and then maybe next group of 10 or 12 sessions it'll be about somebody else's story. But so you want to be in a world that you love enough that you start caring about the places and the legacies that your character is leaving, and not just about your character's goals, right? And I think to me that transition is part of growing up, right? And as part of maturing, just like as a person, is being able to stop thinking about just what do I want and start thinking about okay, well, there are kids. If you don't have kids, there's still people who are going to live after you, right? Who are going to have to deal with all the crap that you leave in the world, right? So you have to start thinking about them. And I think that this kind of game gears itself towards that kind of thinking, which I think is beneficial for you as a person, but also is a storytelling experience that does not exist almost anywhere else.
Right.
There's not really any TV show that will give you this kind of storytelling experience, this multi-generational becoming invested in the place and the character, the fabric, the soil of the thing. There's not really a TV show that does this. I think there are a couple that maybe kind of approach it. Movies don't usually take this. Although there are a few outliers, but generally speaking, your big blockbusters are focused on one character or a small group of characters, right? And they're all badasses. They're all really cool. They're all really sexy. They're all really flashy. And then it's like, well, okay, but what happens after the credits roll, right? And there aren't a whole lot of books that give you this experience either. Again, there are a few.
There's outliers. They stand out as sort of the exemplars.
Right. Yeah, but this is a storytelling experience that you can't get many other places, and I think it's one that's ultimately beneficial and really enjoyable. And so, for those reasons, as a player, I think this kind of game has a lot to commend itself.
Yeah, and I think so. First, Josh, any reaction? I feel like
I'm really sorry, guys.
No, dude.
No, I mean,
our long form podcast. Yeah.
I don't disagree with any of that. It's I think Richard is just saying it very eloquently, so I'm happy to listen.
Something you both brought up that I like. Josh, you brought this up with the crazy blood goddess. Richard, you brought this up with Modred, because I refused to refer to him as single. How do GMs model this game for their players? Well, it's the same way you model anything else. You show the NPCs in the world doing the same thing. When I'm running RuneQuest, one of the first things I do is I have people give up in the middle of a fight. I'm not willing to die over this. Just ransom me back, and it puts in the player's head,
oh, I can do this.
Oh wait, if I give up, I don't have to die here. My tribe will ransom me back. Becca always wants to build strongholds in campaigns. So the first thing we start by showing this guy is building a stronghold wait, could I do that? Yeah. Mordred is like, I am concerned, like, I want this to be a long-term thing because I want it to be mine.
Right.
Or I want to go out and become the goddess of blood and murder. Granted, you hope the heroes stop them, but what you're showing the people in the world are not just focused.
Right.
They're not a static NPC waiting to say,
Right.
welcome to Corellia, which is a Final Fantasy 1 reference. Like the one guard that's like, if you have not read 8-Bit Theater, there's an old webcomic. There's like a whole panel of the fighter just trying to get the guy to say anything else, and it just keeps moving. They're not static NPCs. Well,
Right.
what's going on? Well, no, we have to go out on this thing because here's what's going on. I think the moment for me, we joke about the RuneQuest game. The RuneQuest game at the end of the whole campaign was about two things: cattle raids and weddings. Because it was.
That's what the Tyne is about.
Yeah.
Thing.
And then, oh man, I had something else I was going to say.
Yeah, at the end of my tour campaign, in the very last session, Mogard, Prince Eagle, who's been a thorn in the side of every player group for the entire campaign. At this point, he's an old man, and he dies fighting the Mirkwood Dragon. And
no, I don't want to feel for him.
And that's the thing, like he goes out in a kind of a like in a proper way, like and they were all a little surprised. And then somebody was like, well, I mean, he really did care about his people and about the kingdom that he was trying to establish and all this stuff. And so the end, like in the final, as we're kind of talking so as the credits roll, what are your characters going to do next? And one of the players, Jeremy, decided that, and he had a character who, at this point, he was playing a Woodman character who was very highly placed in that society in terms of standing and everything. He said, I'm going to take over where Prince Ingold left off. And he became the new Prince of the Woodmen. And he's like, I'm not going to do everything the way he did it. I'm going to change things. It's going to be better. But I now see the need, like somebody, like there's, if we want this society that we worked for, if we want it to continue, then there's got to be stability, and we can't just like let it fall into a civil war, anarchy again. And I'm the only person that everyone likes enough and respects enough. My character's the only person that everyone likes and respects enough to let him take over.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what he did, and it was just like it was a nice. You're talking about like modeling things for your players, right? That was the very last session, but I was just like, yeah,
you got it.
That's everything I wanted this campaign to say.
Yeah.
So
I remember the other thing that as a player that I love playing the Grand Campaign. There's sometimes when you're playing in like a 5e game, a Pathfinder adventure pack, the Masks of Nyarlathotep, the clock is running.
Yeah.
Right. Every session, you've got to be making forward progress. My Jackals game last week, and I think it's because they know the style of game that this is going to be. They spent the whole time looking at trees and asking questions about trees because it fascinated one or two of the players in the moment.
Mm.
You get, and we're going to talk about a lot of this next. So next session, we're going to talk about systems and why systems are important, because systems establish kind of the foundational truths of what the game is going to be about. But the Grand Campaign allows space to breathe. It allows your space for your character to live, as opposed to you got to get to that next milestone, because if you don't, then the dragon's going to come and it's going to devour everything.
What's the thing people always complain about when they try to read Tolkien?
There's not enough Elvish poetry.
I don't think that's the thing people complain about.
Oh, it's just weird.
People always complain about how much time Tolkien spends describing the landscape. Okay. Not everyone complains about this. Obviously, a lot of us enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
But that complaint is rooted in a, there's that meme where like Tolkien's composition teacher is like, describe a tree in as few words as possible. And Tolkien's like, no.
Impossible.
Yes. I mean, so here's the thing, like, Tolkien can spend that much time describing the landscape because it's a real place in his mind, and it's a beautiful place, and he sees it as basically being worth describing, right? And so when I was running Tor, and when I run my other campaigns, like I always, whenever you arrive in a new location, I will try to have 10 minutes worth of content, just describing. Here's what it looks like. This is the landscape. These are the, if you're arriving at a new city, like here are the things that strike you about the city when you first arrive here. Like that stuff is important because you need to be able to establish, you can spend time on it because you've got 3 years or however many years. Like you've got time, right? So you can spend the time on that stuff, but it establishes for the players, well, the GM is putting this much time into it, right? So here's the thing. And this is why I do not like. And when I say I do not like, I do not mean that people who do this are bad people, that they're immoral. I don't mean that their mother was a hamster or that their father smelled elderberries. But when I say I don't like this, I don't like zero prep games. For the simple reason, and I don't like games where like I know and I can tell when the DM is just making up the setting out of his butt as he's going. Right. I don't like that. The reason I don't like that, obviously we all improvise, but the reason I don't like that is because I feel like, well, if you can't be bothered to care, why should I?
Yeah, your players will pick up on the investment that you put in.
Yeah,
and we're not saying that you have to spend like 100 hours prepping the grand campaign.
Right.
But spend some time. Your players will. They'll notice it. They'll pick up on it.
Yeah, like if they,
I think the zero prep game also. I think investing. I had a thought. I'm so sorry. The zero prep game, right? The idea is, right, here are the tools by which you can just kind of go into a game and just move through it. But also world building does that as well, right? I mean, that's when I get burnt out on a game, it is not because it took me a long time to prep. It's because I don't know, it's any number of dozens of factors. And my response to getting burnt out on a game is to build more of the world. Right? The more world building I put in, actually, the more excited I get about the game, as long as I can as long as I keep it in my head that this is something my players probably won't find, might not find, probably won't appreciate, and certainly won't tear up as they like I do when I'm writing it when they encounter it. If I can keep that just in the forefront of my mind and understand that I'm doing this for me and building this world that is real to me and that I care about. If I world build, I don't need to. It is exhausting to me to plan a session and for the players to just go off and do something else, but also I want them to be able to do that. I want them to have that freedom. If I build my world really well, I don't have to be worried about them going off somewhere. I'm ready, and I don't have a plan for them to ruin.
Yeah. I mean, and we've talked about this, right? The joy of the grand campaign for me is the fact that I know the world so well that when I'm forced to improvise, I'm so steeped in the world,
right,
and in the campaign and the character motivations that I'm just like, it's abductive reasoning. Here is the most logical response to the question that has been asked.
Yeah, when I'm running Tolkien, usually my prep for the tour sessions, especially once we picked up steam, was simply write a recap of the previous session. We'll talk more about this when we get into a future episode. Why the recap is maybe the most important thing you should do as a DM.
We're gonna have a whole episode on recaps.
Yeah,
and we'll recap everything that's come up to that point. Yeah, we'll go forward.
I like it. Yeah. So I would write the recap, and then I would I'll make a list of here's the players' goals, here's my NPC's goals. And then I would sit down and say to the players, so this is what happened last time. What do you do?
Yeah.
And then just go from there. And like you said, it's that abductive reasoning. It's saying what's just a logical thing that would happen. And I know the internal logic of Tolkien's world. And I know, and even in cases like where you couldn't point at a precedent in Tolkien, I know the internal logic of early Iron Ages, Northwestern Europe, better than I know almost anything.
Yeah.
Because that's my field of study. So I just sort of think, well, what would somebody in a Norse saga do? Oh, revenge. That's what it's do.
Revenge. Yeah.
Revenge. Yeah. So at that point, it's not zero threat in that all of the groundwork has already been done, right? I have this big collection of tools, or all the raw materials laid out, things like this. It's like somebody who is a good artist, right? Like a painter or something like that, can sit down, make their sketch, get the paints out, paint a beautiful painting, and basically start to finish and kind of just like make it up as they go along, right? But the reason they can do that is because they've made thousands upon thousands of other concept sketches. They've drawn hand a million times before. They've drawn an apple a million times before. They've drawn, the human eye a million times before. So when it comes time to do this painting, right, they already have all that deep bench, right, that repertoire built up. And the grand campaign is just a way that'll happen naturally. Even if you don't have it when you start, by the time you get to the end, you'll have it.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Well, we're going to be, so Richard does talk, and I put in the show notes from last time, we linked to your Universal History series and to your Amansul podcast. If you want to hear Richard talk more about Tolkien, go enjoy the Amansul podcast. Rook did say that the thing that he always loves is that there's not as much dwarven poetry in Tolkien.
I have dwarven poetry.
Yeah?
Yeah, because when I was writing, when I was doing Tor, I just sort of said, well, we had a lot of dwarven characters and spent a whole lot of time trying to recover a lost dwarven settlement, which they did manage to do, by the way. It came at a great cost, but they did manage to recover the Great Elf. And the thing is, there is dwarven poetry in Tolkien, and I don't want to get too much into this, but actually, dwarven poetry seems to be the basis of Hobbit poetry. Because if you look at the meter that Tolkien uses for Hobbit poetry, it's the same or slightly modified to the meter he always uses for dwarven poetry.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this is just like a little fun hack for Tolkien that I've just made use of throughout all of my world building for years, is that Tolkien will use different metrical forms for different cultures, and is to kind of indicate a sense of this culture has its own poetic diction, but he uses all the different English poetry styles to convey that. So it's really, I think, brilliantly done. My favorite example of this, by the way, is that when the Eagles they're singing their song, it's not an English metrical form at all. It's like a Semitic, appositional poetry like you would find in the Psalms.
Yeah.
And which is a great way of sort of communicating that the Eagles are really other from
everything else we've
seen so far. And they also have like this sort of divine connection, which of course the Eagles do.
Yeah.
So anyway, so what I did is I looked at, here's the meter. Every time we have a dwarf singing a poem, which there are several examples of in The Hobbit, and then also a couple of times the Lord of the Rings with Gimli sings a poem. And look at what are the meters that they use and what's the style of poetry that they use, and then you can use that to spin off your so I use that to spin off, like, to write more dwarven poetry in that same style. And actually, I mean, the thing is, sometimes we have this idea that dwarves are like, very uncouth or not beautiful, not good poets or musicians or something like that, because I think we have this idea that I think, as Colville says, that dwarves are just like short Klingons. But we have to remember that dwarves actually, in Tolkien, dwarves actually have a tremendously well-developed sense of beauty.
That's the whole point of Gimli and Legolas after the Lord of the
They're
Rings,
extremely good instrumentalists, right? Very gifted. If you read The Hobbit, they're very gifted, fiddle players, harp players, flute players, etc. They're very accomplished poets, and they have, obviously they're master craftsmen. And in Tolkien, poetry and like handicraft, those things kind of go together. So, so actually, dwarven poetry should be extremely beautiful, I think. Awesome. So.
Well, I think that's going to bring us to the end of this episode. We will be back in a month, and we're going to talk next one is our crunchy one, because we're just going to be talking about systems. Like what do we think makes a good system for a grand campaign? Why is choosing a system important, right? Because in a lot of ways, the system provides the bedrock and sort of the agreed upon starting point for, I will call it, an ideal of truth in your game. And we'll talk more about that next time. So, as always, thank you for tuning in, to everyone who tuned in. Rook, again, thank you as always for your generosity. We will be back in a month with more Grand Campaign. We'll be back in about 3 weeks with more Exploring Glorantha, and then you can check out Behind the Screen twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays on the Iconic Production channel. I will post links to Richard's stuff that he is doing on the internet right now, because it's totally great stuff and is putting beauty back into the world, and that's one of the goals that we have with the show. And then Josh, I'd love to have you on Behind the Screen here sometime when we can align the schedules and talk more about the Gebercan campaign and kind of do an update on seeing when that is.
Yeah, that'd be a ton of fun. I'm totally up for
Any
that.
final thoughts? I realize, I apologize, with you not being in the studio, I have to turn to see you, and so I really enjoy your feedback that you've been putting in the show. So I'm gonna let you have the final thought here. Any final ones?
You can't put that on me with the final thought to close out the show.
Bring it home.
You should play in a long-term campaign. You should run a long-term campaign. The benefits, start now. Watch Matt Colville. He's not geared specifically towards grand campaigns, but my God, can you learn about running the game from him?
Yeah.
And I think thinking about it really, really well, and along a lot of the similar lines that we talk about here on the show. Richard said it very well, but just in short, I think the benefits for, honestly, just attention span and really being able to invest in something and to have this very real and important thing happening that's outside of all of the rest of what we do and all of the running around and all of the mobile things is I think incalculable. It's not something that you can quantify, but it is essential.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. First of all, thank you to Richard and Josh. This is a bright spot in my month. And then thank you to everyone who showed up. Evan, also good to see you. I don't think I called you out as well. We will be back next month talking about the crunchy side, the system side, why it's important and essential.
And the essential oils and granola. And
that's right. Yeah. I don't plan to shave my beard. That's not true.
I'm not going to shave my beard for next month.
Yeah, that is something you can count on the Grand Campaign. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming, and we'll be back in a month. Have a good one.